Listen carefully. Imagine a world before kings, before temples, before the sound of bronze rang across the earth. The world is quiet. Only the crack of stone tools, the rustle of fire in the night, and the low hum of survival. But then something changed. A discovery so small it began in the glow of a fire pit, yet so powerful it would reshape everything that came after. This was not just survival anymore. This was the dawn of fire and metal dot picture, a night tens of thousands of years ago. The stars stretch endlessly above, brighter than we will ever see them today. A group of people sit around a fire. The flames lick at the sky, sparks spiraling upward like tiny suns. The smell of smoke mixes with the earth, with the sweat of the hunters, with the raw scent of animal hides stretched nearby. They are safe for now. Fire is their shield. It keeps away the wolves and the dark. It gives warmth against the biting. Cold. Fire is alive and they know it. It dances, it consumes, it destroys, but it also creates. Somewhere in the ashes of that ancient fire pit, something strange happens. A stone, not quite like the others, dark and heavy, melts. The flames twist its body, and in the morning, when the fire dies and the hunters return, they find it transformed. The surface gleams with a strange shine. It is not rock. It is not earth. It is something new. They do not yet know it, but in their hands lies the first whisper of metal dot centuries pass. Millennia even. Fire and stone carry humanity forward. The first sparks of control spread slowly. People learn to tame flames, not just for warmth, but for cooking, for clearing land, for shaping the world. Every fire pit becomes a laboratory of discovery. But the real revolution begins when they learn to coax copper from the earth. Imagine digging into the ground, pulling out chunks of bright green stone malachite, and then feeding it to the fire. The flames roar higher, smoke fills the air, and the stone begins to bleed. Out drips copper, soft and glowing like the sun. This is no ordinary stone. This is power. In copper they see mirrors, jewelry, symbols of status. Soft, yes, but beautiful, something more than mere survival. A sign that humans are no longer just creatures of the wild. They are becoming creators. The world of copper is quiet at first, used in ornaments, in trinkets. But as centuries flow like rivers, a new secret reveals itself. Copper alone bends too easily. It cannot cut, cannot strike with lasting force. But when mixed with another gift of the earth tin, it transforms bronze harder, sharper, stronger. The first true alloy, the first man-made material. For the first time, humanity does not just accept the world as it is. They shape it into what they want it to be, and that changes everything. Imagine the clang of a bronze axe striking wood. The ring echoes through the forest, sharper than any stone edge could ever sound. Trees fall faster, fields open wider, settlements grow larger. Bronze tools cut paths into the earth itself, and then bronze finds its way into weapons. The shine of bronze daggers, the curve of bronze swords, the lethal precision of bronze-tipped spears. In the hands of warriors, bronze becomes not just a tool, but a force. The balance of power shifts. Those who master the fire, those who command the metal, rise above the rest. Bronze is more than strength, it is status. It is wealth, it is civilization itself. But let's not forget the fire. always the fire. Without it there is no bronze, no smelting, no forging. Villages grow into towns around the hearth, around the furnaces that roar like dragons. Picture a workshop at dusk. The air is thick with smoke, the smell of burning charcoal stings your nose. Molten bronze glows in clay crucibles. Sparks fly as metal is poured into stone molds. It is hot, suffocating, alive. To step into that place is to stand at the heart of creation. And with each tool, each weapon, each ornament, a new story begins. The story of power, of trade, of kingdoms yet to come. But what did it feel like to live in this new age? Imagine being born in a small farming village, surrounded by the chatter of chickens, the lowing of cattle, the smoke curling from huts. You see men working with fire, drawing out shapes from glowing metal. To you, it looks like magic. Stone and flame combine to make something sharper than claws, stronger than bone. Bronze becomes part of daily life. The farmer holds a bronze plow and cuts deeper into the soil. The soldier sharpens his bronze sword before battle. The craftsman carves symbols into bronze jewelry, stories etched in metal that will outlive him. For the first time, humanity has found a way to capture permanence. This is why the dawn of fire and metal matters. It is not just about invention. It is about transformation. Before bronze, humans lived close to nature, bound by what the earth provided. With bronze, they began to bend the earth to their will. Cities rise where once there were only huts. Leaders emerge not just as hunters or gatherers, but as rulers who command workshops and armies. Myths and legends grow around fire and metal. Blacksmiths are seen as half magician, half priest, able to wield the secrets of the earth itself. The age of stone ends. The age of bronze begins. But this new world is not without shadows. Fire, once a friend, becomes dangerous in new ways. A spark that forges metal can also destroy homes. Workshops consume forests for fuel, the land scarred by mining. And those who hold bronze weapons hold power over those who do not. Villages fall to cities. Cities fall to kingdoms. The first empires rise from the smoke of the forge. Bronze is not just a tool. It is a promise and a threat. Listen again to the sound. Not the silence of stone tools, not the crack of flint, but the ring of bronze, sharp, clear, echoing across valleys and rivers. This sound is the heartbeat of a new age. It is the sound of walls being built, of armies marching, of gods being carved into idols that shine in the sun. It is the sound of a humanity stepping into something greater, something more dangerous, something that will carry them to both glory and collapse. The dawn of fire and metal is not just a beginning. It is the foundation of everything that comes next. And so, as the flames roar higher, and the first swords are lifted into the light, the world takes its first steps toward kingdoms, toward gods, toward the rise and fall of civilizations. Because where there is fire, there is creation, and where there is metal, there is power. This was the dawn, the spark before the storm. Close your eyes and picture this. The world is no longer a scattering of tiny villages. Smoke curls from 1,000 hearths. The sound of hammers echoes across valleys. Rivers carry boats heavy with grain and copper. Something is stirring something greater than any tribe has ever imagined. For the first time in human history, strangers are gathering under one banner. Walls are rising. Palaces are being carved from mud brick and stone. And above it all, a single voice rules, the voice of a king. This is the moment when small fires became empires. This is the birth of kingdoms. The world of early humans was once scattered and fragile. Villages hugged rivers and fields, tied to the land like children, clinging to a mother's hand. But as bronze tools cut deeper into soil, harvests grew. Fields expanded. Population swelled dot, and with more people came new problems. Who owns the land? Who protects the harvest? Who speaks for the village when outsiders arrive? At first, answers were simple. Families looked to elders, to wise hunters, to those who had proven themselves in battle or through trade. But as villages grew into towns, and towns swelled into early cities, the weight of leadership became too heavy for a single council of elders. A new figure emerged. Someone who could command. Someone who could unite. The first kings. Imagine walking through one of the first great cities, Uruk in Mesopotamia, perhaps nearly 5,000 years ago. The air is thick with the smell of baking bread and smoke from countless ovens. Mud brick walls tower overhead. Narrow streets twist like veins, crowded with merchants calling out their goods. Jars of oil, baskets of barley, gleaming bronze tools. But above the city, higher than everything else, a great temple rises. A ziggurat tier after tier of sun-dried brick reaching toward the heavens. It glows in the sunlight, a stairway to the gods. And at its heart the king stands, not just a man but a symbol, a bridge between the earth and the divine dot to the people of Uruk. The king is more than a ruler. He is chosen by the gods themselves. His authority is sacred, his word law. This is how kingdoms begin, not only with power, but with belief. People surrender their independence because they believe in something larger than themselves. Order, protection, the will of heaven. But kingdoms are not built on belief alone. They rise on walls and fields, on armies and scribes. The birth of kingdoms is also the birth of bureaucracy. Picture scribes bent over clay tablets, pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay. They are recording taxes, measuring grain, tracking. Soldiers. Every stroke of their stylus turns chaos into order. And with writing, kings gain a new weapon. Memory. No longer are laws spoken and forgotten. They are carved into stone, eternal, binding across generations. Step into Egypt during this. Same age. The Nile flows endlessly, its floods carving life into the desert. On its banks, a new kind of ruler emerges, Pharaoh. Not just a king, but a living god. Picture the first dynasties. Processions of priests carrying incense, the smell sweet and heavy in the air. Farmers bowing low as the pharaoh passes, his crown glinting like the sun. To them he is not only ruler of men, but the very link between earth and sky. When the Nile floods, it is his blessing. When it withholds, it is his wrath. Here, power is more than politics, it is cosmic. The pharaoh is the keeper of balance, the one who ensures that the world does not descend into chaos. And so, across the world, a pattern unfolds. Kingdoms rise where people need order. Leaders take power, sometimes through charisma, sometimes through conquest, sometimes through divine claim. But always they gather the threads of society and weave them into something larger than the village, larger than the clan. Of course, kingdoms bring more than unity. They bring inequality. For the first time, humanity divides sharply rulers and ruled, rich and poor, masters and servants. Palaces rise, but so too do slums. Fields are vast, but worked by hands that often see little reward. Still, the promise of security, of belonging, binds people to their kings. Better to live under the walls of a kingdom than to face the wild chaos. Beyond now, imagine the sound of drums at the city gates, the call of horns. A king's army gathers rows of men carrying spears tipped with bronze, chariots gleaming in the sunlight. This is another face of the kingdom. War. Villages could defend themselves with walls of wood and stone. But kingdoms, they wage campaigns. They march across mountains, rivers, and deserts, their banners flying, their kings leading them to glory. The age of kings is also the age of conquest. Victory brings treasure grain, cattle, slaves, and glory carved into stone tablets. Defeat brings ruin, cities burned, people enslaved. From this moment onward, history becomes a story of winners and losers, of kingdoms rising and kingdoms falling. But kingdoms are not just about power and war. They are about culture. In their walls, humanity's first great achievements are born. Step into the palace of Knossos on Crete. Its walls are painted with frescoes bright blues, reds, and golds. Bulls leap across the walls. Dancers twist in ritual games. This is not just politics. It is art, ritual, identity. Step into Mesopotamia again. You hear music drifting from lyres, priests chanting hymns, children reciting the earliest forms of literature, the stories of Gilgamesh, the epic of a king who sought immortality. These are not just stories. They are mirrors of a society learning to dream beyond survival. The birth of kingdoms is also the birth of civilization as we know it. Roads stretch across the land. Irrigation channels carry water far from rivers. Temples rise like mountains. Writing, law, religion, art, these bloom together in the fertile soil of kingdoms. But with this growth comes fragility. Kingdoms depend on their kings, on their scribes, on their gods. What happens if a king falls? What happens if the harvest fails or the gods seem silent? The promise of order becomes a weight. The first cracks in these great experiments already lurk in the shadows. Still, stand back and look at this moment in time. It is breathtaking. For tens of thousands of years, humans lived in small bands, in fragile huts. And now, in the Bronze Age, they live under vast walls, walk among palaces, bow to kings who claim the heavens. It is the first great leap toward the world we know today. The leap from tribe to state, from survival to civilization, from family to nation. So, when we speak of the birth of kingdoms, we are speaking of the moment when humanity first learned to live together in numbers too vast to count, when strangers became neighbors, when belief became law, when one voice could command thousands. It was the beginning of order, the beginning of empire, the beginning of history itself. But kingdoms do not rise alone. They are born from rivers, from fertile soil, from the gifts of the earth itself. To understand why Egypt thrived, why Mesopotamia endured, why India's valleys flourished, we must look not at kings, but at the rivers that shape them. Imagine standing on the banks of a great river at dawn. Mist rises from the water, soft and glowing in the light of the rising sun. The air is cool, carrying the smell of wet earth and fresh reeds. Birds circle overhead, their calls echoing across the stillness. Beneath your feet, the ground is rich, damp, a live dot, and then you see it, the river itself. Wide, endless, moving like a giant serpent across the land. Its surface glimmers, carrying life wherever it flows. For ancient humans, this was not just water. It was power. It was survival. It was the hand of the gods carved into the earth. Civilization did not rise in deserts. It did not begin in mountains or forests. It was born on the banks of rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, and Euphrates, the Indus, the Yellow River. These were not just waterways. They were the beating hearts of the first kingdoms. Let's begin with the Nile. Close your eyes and picture Egypt 5,000 years ago. Stretching in every direction is desert dry, silent, deadly. But cutting through it all, like a ribbon of life, is the Nile. Every year it floods, spilling over its banks, leaving behind a black blanket of fertile soil. Without it, there is nothing. With it, Egypt becomes the breadbasket of the ancient world. Farmers wait eagerly for the flood. They watch the waters rise, praying it will be just enough, not too little, not too much. And when it is perfect, the fields bloom with wheat and barley. The smell of fresh grain fills the air. This is not just farming. This is the rhythm of life, the heartbeat of an entire civilization. And above it all stands Pharaoh, the living god, the one said to command the Nile itself. To the Egyptians, the river is not just water, it is a miracle, a divine gift. There, temples are carved with hymns to Hapi, the god of the flood. Their calendars are built around the river's cycle. Their entire world is shaped by its flow. Now, shift your mind eastward, to the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Here the rivers are not gentle. They are wild, unpredictable, prone to sudden floods and violent storms. The land is fertile, yes, but it is also dangerous. Imagine being a farmer here. You rise before dawn, step into fields fed by irrigation channels you dug with your neighbors. The soil is rich, your crops grow tall. But you never know when disaster will strike. Too much water, and your fields drown. Too little, and they crack under the sun. This struggle shaped the Mesopotamian soul. To survive here, people had to work together, building canals, dikes, and walls. Order became everything. Kings emerged, not just as warriors, but as organizers, masters of water. And above them, stern gods demanded obedience. Mesopotamian myths are full of floods, storms, and divine wrath. Life here was fragile, always at the mercy of the rivers. And that fragility forged some of the world's first laws, first writing, and first cities. Farther east still, another giant stirred the Indus River and its mighty tributaries. Here, a civilization rose that remains mysterious even today. The cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro stretched along the Indus, their streets laid out in perfect grids, their houses lined with drains and wells. Walk those streets in your mind. The smell of cooking fires drifts from courtyards. Traders move carts of grain and pottery. The river hums in the distance, feeding the fields that surround the city. The Indus people built no great pyramids, no towering ziggurats, but they built something just as powerful: order, equality, and trade. The river gave them not just food, but connection. Boats moved up and down its waters, carrying beads, shells, cotton, and metals. The Indus civilization stretched like a web across thousands of miles, all tied together by the lifeblood of the river dot. And then in China, another river carved a different destiny. The Yellow River, called the River of Sorrows. It carried silt so rich it could feed millions, but also so unpredictable it destroyed villages without warning. Imagine living there. One year the harvest is bountiful, the fields bursting with millet and rice. The next year the river changes course, drowning entire settlements. The air smells of mud, thick and choking. Survivors rebuild again and again, learning to respect the river's rage. Out of this hardship grew the first Chinese dynasties. Kings rose, claiming the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Their job was to keep balance, to command the floods, to keep order in a world of chaos. The Yellow River shaped not only their crops, but their beliefs, their politics, and their destiny. Do you see the pattern? Every great civilization of the Bronze Age was tied to a river. Without rivers, no cities. Without rivers, no kingdoms. Rivers fed the fields, and fields fed the armies. They carried trade, ideas, and culture from one land to another. They gave life, but they also took it away. To live by a river was to live on the edge of both blessing and curse. Think of the sounds of these worlds: the creak of wooden plows cutting into damp soil, the slap of water against the sides of boats, the chants of workers digging canals under the sun. Think of the sights: endless green fields spreading across desert sands, cities rising like islands in seas of farmland, temples mirrored in calm waters at dawn. And think of the feeling, the dependence, the awe, the fear. For ancient peoples, rivers were gods, not symbols of gods, actual gods, living and breathing, shaping human fate. But rivers did more than grow food. They connected worlds. The Nile carried goods from deep Africa to the Mediterranean. The Tigris and Euphrates linked mountains to the Persian Gulf, opening doors to trade with distant lands. The Indus carried cotton and beads to Mesopotamia. The Yellow River tied northern China to the heartlands of Asia. Through rivers, civilizations met each other. Through rivers, ideas traveled, writing myths, technologies, beliefs. The Bronze Age world was not isolated. It was stitched together by flowing veins of water. Still, power always comes with danger. To control rivers was to control people. Kings who built canals, who tamed floods, who stored water in great reservoirs. These kings became gods in the eyes of their subjects. But when the floods failed, when canals broke, when rivers shifted course, kingdoms collapsed. This is why rivers are both the foundation and the fragility of the Bronze Age. They created, but they could also destroy. They fed, but they could also starve. They blessed, but they could also curse. So when we speak of rivers of power, we are speaking of more than water. We are speaking of destiny. The Nile made Egypt eternal. The Tigris and Euphrates made Mesopotamia disciplined and inventive. The Indus created order and trade. The Yellow River forged resilience and faith in the mandate of heaven. These rivers are the silent architects of history, Without them there would be no pyramids, no ziggurats, no dynasties, no cities, just scattered tribes still clinging to. The wild dot stand again on the riverbank in your imagination. Hear the rush of water. Feel the damp earth under your feet. Smell the grain fields stretching endlessly around you. This was life itself thousands of years ago. To live by a river was to live at the center of the world. The rivers gave humanity its first kingdoms. They carried its first gods. They fed its first armies. They shaped its first laws, and yet the rivers were only the beginning. For in those cities, on those river banks, people began to imagine beings greater than themselves, gods who ruled the skies, the earth, and the waters, myths that explained the floods, the harvests, the storms, and kings who claimed to walk in the footsteps of those gods. Asterisk, from the flowing rivers that gave life, humanity's eyes lifted to the heavens. The Nile, the Tigris, the Indus, the Yellow River, they were powerful, yes. But what about the gods behind them? What about the myths that gave meaning to their floods and storms? Imagine this. You are standing in a city thousands of years ago. The streets are alive with the sound of drums. Incense burns in the air, thick and sweet, drifting upward like smoke rising to the heavens. Thousands of people kneel in silence, their faces pressed to the ground. And before them, walking through the crowd, is not just a man, he is something more. He is clothed in gold, crowned with jewels, his every step followed by whispers and chants dot to the people. He is not human at all. He is divine. A god in flesh dot, this was the world of the Bronze Age, a time when the line between mortal and divine blurred, a time when kings ruled not just by power, but by claiming the very essence of heaven. These were the gods who walked among men. The rivers had given rise to kingdoms. But kingdoms needed more than walls and armies. They needed meaning. They needed stories to explain why kings ruled, why floods came, why harvests failed, and why death stalked every village. And so, myths were born dot in Mesopotamia. The gods were fierce and unpredictable, like the rivers themselves. Picture the temple towers of Ur and Ur-Uxigorats rising like mountains of brick, their tops lost in the clouds. Priests climbed their steps carrying food, wine, and incense. At the summit, they left offerings, hoping to win the favor of gods, like Enlil, the storm lord, or Inanna, the goddess of love and war. For these people, the gods were not distant. They lived in the wind, in the storms, in the rivers. They walked the earth in disguise, blessing or punishing as they pleased. To anger them was to invite disaster. In Egypt, the divine was even closer. The pharaoh was not just chosen by the gods, he was a god. His body carried the power of Horus, the falcon lord of the sky. His soul would one day unite with Ra, the sun itself. Picture a coronation in Thebes. The air smells of lotus flowers and incense. Priests chant in steady rhythm as the pharaoh is crowned. To the people, this is not just a man taking power. It is the heavens themselves placing their will on earth. When the Nile floods, it is the pharaoh's blessing. When the fields fail, it is the pharaoh's anger. In this way, belief and politics became one. Obedience was not just loyalty to a ruler. It was loyalty to the gods. And yet, in these early civilizations, gods were not only rulers. They were storytellers. Myths explained the mysteries of life. gave comfort in chaos, and offered hope in a world full of danger. Think of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the world's first great tale. It tells the story of a king who was 2/3 God and 1/3 man. Gilgamesh was powerful, mighty, but flawed. He sought immortality, fought monsters, and journeyed across the earth in search of meaning. This was not just a story. It was a mirror, a reminder that even kings, even those who claimed divine blood, faced fear and death. It was the human heart searching for answers through the voice of the gods. Everywhere you look in the Bronze Age, gods walk beside humanity. In Greece, Zeus hurls thunder from the sky. Athena whispers wisdom to leaders, and Poseidon shakes the earth with his trident. Their temples gleam with marble, their statues tower over city squares. To worship is not just ritual, it is survival. Offend the gods, and your city could burn. Please them, and your ships might sail safely across the sea. In the Indus Valley. Though their gods remain hidden to us, clues whisper from the stones. Seals carved with strange figures, horned deities, animals, sacred symbols. Perhaps they prayed for fertility, for rain, for protection. Their gods may be lost to us now, but their presence shaped daily life, just as surely as the rivers that fed their cities. In China, the earliest dynasties spoke to spirits through oracle bones. Imagine a priest holding a turtle shell over a fire, watching it crack. Each crack was a message from the ancestors, from the gods above. Kings ruled not by might alone, but by holding the mandate of heaven, the sacred right to govern, granted and taken away by the gods themselves. Think of what this meant for ordinary people. When the sun rose each morning, it was not just the sky. It was Ra's golden chariot crossing the heavens. When thunder shook the earth, it was not weather. It was Enlil's anger or Zeus's fury. When the river flooded, it was not chance. It was the gods giving or taking life. The world was alive with meaning. Every sound, every sight, every smell was part of a greater story, but myths were more than belief. They were tools of power. Kings and priests told these stories not only to explain the world, but to shape it. If a pharaoh was a god, then obedience was unquestionable. If Mesopotamian floods came from angry deities, then priests held the key to calm them. If the mandate of heaven was given to a Chinese king, then rebellion was not just treason, it was a cosmic crime. Gods gave rulers the right to lead. And in return, rulers built temples, offered sacrifices, and carved their devotion into stone. Now, picture the rituals. Imagine standing in the courtyard of a temple at dawn. The smell of burning incense fills your lungs. Musicians strike drums, their rhythms echoing like heartbeats. Priests in white robes chant, their voices rising and falling like waves. The crowd bows low as a golden idol is lifted high, gleaming in the morning sun. You feel it in your chest, the awe, the fear, the belief that something greater is here, watching, listening. For the people of the Bronze Age, this was not theater. This was reality. And yet, gods were not always kind. Floods still drowned cities. Droughts still killed harvests. Plagues still swept through streets. Death came for all, even kings. For every gift the gods gave, they also demanded sacrifice. Sheep, goats, oxen, grain, all were offered in smoke and blood. And in the darkest times, even humans were given their cries rising with the flames. Gods who walked among men were powerful, but they were not always merciful. But do not mistake this for hopelessness. Out of these myths, out of this devotion, came art, music, and stories that still live today. The pyramids of Egypt are not just tombs, they are stairways to the heavens. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia are not just buildings, they are mountains built by men to touch the sky. The songs of priests, the hymns of worshippers, the epics of kings, all are echoes of humanity reaching upward, searching for meaning in the divine dot. When we look back now, it is easy to see myths as fiction, gods as imagination. But to those who lived then, they were as real as stone. The gods walked beside them, spoke through storms, and carved destiny into every sunrise. The birth of kingdoms gave humanity order, but the gods gave them purpose. Together they built civilizations that would outlast the ages. Stand once more in that ancient city in your mind. The drums fade, the incense smoke drifts higher, and the golden figure of the king passes before you. Is he a man? Is he a god? To his people there is no difference. In this world the divine wears human skin, and humans live in the shadow of the divine dot. This was the Bronze Age, a world where gods truly walked among men. Asterisk. But faith alone could not hold kingdoms together. Beyond myths and temples, there was another force, one that tied the world in threads of gold and grain. Trade, ships, caravans, and the endless movement of treasure across the ancient world. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine standing on a shore more than 4,000 years ago. The sun blazes down on restless waves, the air thick with the scent of salt and tar. Wooden ships rock gently in the harbor, their sails furled, their hulls painted with strange symbols. Dock workers shout in languages you cannot understand. Donkeys bray as baskets of copper, lapis lazuli, and jars of honey are unloaded. And then the wonder begins. You see objects from lands you've never heard of. Gold that gleams like the sun, ivory carved into shapes of gods, spices so fragrant that the air itself feels richer. This is not just trade. This is magic. The lifeblood of the Bronze Age dot, because in this ancient world treasure did not sit quietly in one place. It traveled by river, by road, by sea, carrying with it stories, cultures, and secrets that bound distant kingdoms together. These were the secrets of trade and treasure. Civilizations may have risen beside rivers, but they could not thrive alone. Grain filled stomachs, but it did not build empires. For that they needed copper, tin, stone, wood, and above all connection. The Bronze Age was named for bronze itself, a shining metal stronger than copper, made by fusing copper and tin. But here was the challenge. Copper was plentiful in some lands, tin in others. To make bronze, civilizations had to reach beyond their borders. So began one of the greatest stories of the ancient world, the birth of long-distance trade. Picture a caravan leaving Mesopotamia. Camels and donkeys carry sacks of grain, jars of oil, and woven cloth. The desert sun burns the sand until it glitters. Each step stirs up dust. Guards walk alongside, watching the horizon for raiders. By night, the traders sit by the fire, sharing bread and dates. Speaking of far-off cities where kings wear crowns of gold. Now picture a ship leaving Egypt, its wooden hull creaks as sailors. Push it into the Nile. The sails snap open, catching the wind. The river carries it north, out into the Mediterranean. Its cargo, linen, papyrus, glass, and perhaps a little gold. Its destination, the Levant or maybe even Crete. These journeys were dangerous. Storms could sink a ship in moments. Bandits could sweep down on a caravan and vanish into the night. And yet the rewards were too great to resist. Trade was not just about survival. It was about desire. Imagine holding a bead of lapis lazuli, deep blue with tiny golden flecks like stars frozen in stone. This gem came from Afghanistan, thousands of miles away, carried across deserts, rivers, and seas. To the people of Mesopotamia, it was a piece of heaven itself. Priests placed it in temples. Kings wore it on their crowns, or consider cedar wood from Lebanon. Egypt, with its wide deserts, had little timber. But cedar, tall, fragrant, strong, was perfect for temples, ships, and coffins, fit for pharaohs. So prized was it that the Egyptians carved entire hymns praising the trees of foreign lands. Every item carried not just value, but meaning. A lump of tin was the promise of stronger weapons. A jar of olive oil was more than food. It was light for a lamp, balm for the skin, and medicine for the sick. But trade did something even greater. It carried ideas. Alongside goods traveled stories, inventions, and gods. From Mesopotamia came the first writing systems, spreading symbols that became alphabets. From Egypt came knowledge of medicine and the secrets of building stone monuments. From the Indus Valley came weights, measures, and perhaps even the early roots of spirituality. Every ship, every caravan was a bridge between worlds. Let's pause for a moment and walk through a bustling marketplace. The year is around 1500 BCE. We are in Ugarit, a city on the Syrian coast. The air buzzes with noise merchants calling out their wares, animals bleating, children laughing. Stalls are piled high with copper ingots, colored glass, jars of wine, bolts of linen. The smell of roasted fish mingles with spices so sharp they sting your nose. A Phoenician trader haggles over silver. A Mycenaean sailor gestures toward jars of olive oil. A scribe sits in the shade, recording every transaction on a clay tablet, his stylus pressing carefully into wet clay dot. This is more than a market. It is a crossroads of the world. Treasure also carried secrets of power. When a kingdom controlled trade routes, it grew rich and strong. The Hittites, for example, knew the value of tin. By guarding the passes through Anatolia, they controlled the flow of this precious metal, feeding their armies with bronze weapons. Egypt, meanwhile, ruled the Red Sea and eastern Mediterranean, drawing wealth from ships that passed through their waters. And then there were the Minoans of Crete, masters of the sea. Their ships were swift, their harbors busy, their palaces filled with frescoes showing dolphins, bulls, and processions of treasure. They did not conquer with swords, but with trade. Their power was painted in color and carried in jars of wine and oil. Yet trade was fragile. A storm could wipe out a fleet. A single war could block a road. When one kingdom fell, the ripple spread across the entire network. Like a web, the Bronze Age world was connected, and when the strands were cut, everything trembled. Still, for centuries, the system endured, and it left behind treasures that tell us its story even now. Consider the Uluburan shipwreck. found off the coast of Turkey. This vessel, more than 3,000 years old, carried cargo from at least 7 different lands: copper from Cyprus, tin from Central Asia, ivory from Africa, glass from Mesopotamia, and gold from Egypt. One ship, but a world of connections. Or think of the treasures buried in tombs: lapis from Afghanistan, carnelian from the Indus Valley, amber from the Baltic. Even in death, kings demanded the riches of faraway lands, proof that their reach extended beyond the horizon. But trade was not always peaceful. With wealth came envy. With treasure came war. Armies marched to seize ports. Ships were raided at sea, and kings plotted to choke the lifelines of their rivals. Trade was a gift, but also a weapon, and sometimes greed tipped the balance. 2. Much wealth in one place invited enemies. Too much dependence on foreign goods made kingdoms vulnerable. The very system that fed empires could also starve them. Still, it is impossible not to marvel. Picture again that harbor. The sails flutter, the ropes creak, the sun gleams on bronze. The air is alive with the smell of salt, cedar, and spice. Every ship is a mystery box, carrying treasures from lands you may never see. This was the heartbeat of the Bronze Age. Not just kings and gods, not just wars and temples, but the endless movement of goods, ideas, and dreams across a fragile world. When we hold a shard of pottery today, or a bead of glass dug from the sand, we are touching the same treasures that passed through countless hands thousands of years ago. Each one whispers of journeys, of merchants, of secret deals struck under desert suns and stormy skies. The story of trade is the story of connection. The story of treasure is the story of desire. Together they built the world of the Bronze Age. Listen carefully. Can you hear it? The pounding of hooves, the rattle of wheels, the scream of warriors charging across a dusty plain. This is not just the sound of war, it is the sound of revolution. The battlefield of the Bronze Age was about to change forever, because once men fought with spears and shields, face to face, but then came bronze, then came the chariot, and suddenly the art of war was transformed into something faster, deadlier, and unstoppable. This is the story of how warriors of bronze and chariot rose to power, shaping kingdoms, breaking empires, and leaving behind a legacy written in blood and metal. Picture the sun rising over a wide plain. The grass glitters with morning dew. A small group of soldiers gather, their armor gleaming with a coppery glow. Their helmets cover their heads, their shields are round, and in their hands they hold short swords and spears tipped with bronze. For thousands of years, bronze had given warriors the edge. Stronger than stone, sharper than copper, bronze weapons meant battles were no longer equal. A warrior with a bronze sword could cut through the wooden shields of his enemy. A soldier with a bronze axe could smash helmets in a single blow. These were not just tools of war, they were symbols of power. To own bronze was to control life and death. It was to hold the future in your hands, but something even greater was about to arrive. Imagine it. The ground begins to tremble. The air fills with the thunder of hooves. Then, over the hill, they appear, wooden frames, spoked wheels, pulled by horses, fast, light, deadly. The chariot, it was the tank of the ancient world, and when paired with bronze weapons, it became the ultimate weapon of the Bronze Age. The earliest chariots were simple, but deadly: 2 wheels, a small wooden frame, and a pair of horses pulling it across the field. One man would drive while another stood beside him with a bow or spear. Together they moved with terrifying speed, striking before the enemy could react. At first, chariots were rare, the toys of kings and nobles. They were symbols of status, but soon they became engines of war. Armies trained in their use. Craftsmen perfected their design, and horses were bred for strength and speed. The battlefield would never be the same. Let's step into one of those battles. The year is around 1274 BCE. The place, the plains near Kadesh. Here, two giants of the ancient world collide. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II against the mighty Hittite empire. The noise is deafening. Trumpets blare, soldiers shout. The earth shakes under thousands of feet, but the real terror comes from the chariots. Ramses charges with his men, golden chariot gleaming in the sun. His horses surge forward, wheels spinning so fast they blur. Arrows whistle through the air. Men scream, dust chokes the sky. The Battle of Kadesh is one of the greatest chariot battles in history, a storm of bronze-tipped arrows and clashing wheels. It shows us the true power of this machine, the ability to turn the tide of war in minutes. But the chariot was more than just a weapon. It was a stage, a platform of glory. Kings stood tall in them, dazzling their soldiers, terrifying their enemies. To see a ruler in a golden chariot armed with bronze weapons was to see a living god of war. Pharaohs painted themselves in chariots, driving down enemies beneath their wheels. Hittite kings boasted of their mastery of horses and the sky-rending thunder of their war machines. For them, the chariot was not just power, it was identity. And yet, this new way of war had costs. Building a chariot was not easy. It required carpenters, leather workers, metal smiths, and above all, horses. Training a horse to pull a chariot took time and skill. Keeping them fed took land and resources. Chariots were expensive. They could not be built in the thousands like simple spears. This meant that in most kingdoms the chariot was reserved for the elite, the warrior class, those born into privilege. They became the armored nobility of the ancient world, riding above the common foot soldiers, commanding respect and fear still. The chariot spread from the plains of Mesopotamia to the valleys of China, from the Nile of Egypt to the fields of India. Everywhere the chariot arrived, it reshaped society. Think of the stories that grew from it. The Indian epics, like the Mahabharata, speak of warriors riding into battle on shining chariots, their bows raining arrows like storms. In China, entire armies trained in chariot warfare, with hundreds moving in tight formations. In Greece, chariots carried heroes in myth, from Achilles to Heracles, symbols of speed and power. The world of the Bronze Age was bound together, not just by trade, but by war, and the chariot was its chosen weapon. Now, close your eyes. Listen. Do you hear it? The whistle of arrows, the crack of whips, the pounding rhythm of hooves. This was the music of empire. This was the heartbeat of kings. The warrior in his chariot was more than a man. It was a storm on wheels, a god in bronze armor, and when he passed, the earth itself seemed to bow. But war is always a double-edged sword. The chariot that gave kingdoms power also made them fragile. When horses died, when roads broke, when enemies found ways to fight back, the mighty chariot armies could stumble, and when they stumbled, kingdoms fell. For now, though, in the height of the Bronze Age, warriors of bronze and chariot ruled the world, their names carved in stone, their victories sung by poets. their weapons buried in tombs that still shine today. The age of the chariot was not just about blood and conquest. It was about transformation. It turned kings into living gods. It built empires, it spread myths, it forged a new way of thinking about power itself. But it also carried the seeds of danger, for no weapon lasts forever, and no empire stands unbroken. Asterisk, the chariot thundered across plains, but behind the palaces of kings and queens, another kind of power was growing, not forged in bronze or pulled by horses, but painted on walls, carved in stone, sung in rituals. Close your eyes and imagine a world where the sun rises over golden stone, where rivers gleam like ribbons of silver, where palaces stretch so wide they seem to touch the horizon. Imagine a world where kings walk like gods, where every breath of incense, every polished jewel, every painted wall whispers of divine power. This was the age of pharaohs and palaces, a time when rulers shaped entire landscapes, when wealth was measured not in coins but in temples carved from mountains, when human ambition reached heights so dazzling that even today, thousands of years later, we stand in awe. It was an age of spectacle, an age of splendor, and an age of secrets. Picture the Nile River at dawn. Mist rises from the surface. Boats drift quietly along the water, their sails painted in bright colors. Along the banks, farmers bend low to tend to their crops, their chants mixing with the sound of water splashing against the reeds. But then in the distance something far greater rises. Stone temples glitter in the morning sun. Colossal statues gaze across the land with unblinking eyes. Palaces, built of mud brick and limestone, stretch out like miniature cities, housing not just the royal family, but priests, scribes, servants, and guards. This was Egypt, the beating heart of the Bronze Age, and here the pharaoh was more than a king. He was a god on earth. The pharaoh was not just ruler of Egypt. He was Horus, the falcon god living among his people. He was Ra, the sun, shining light across the kingdom. He was Osiris, lord of the afterlife, ensuring the balance of life and death. Every word he spoke was law. Every gesture was divine. To see the pharaoh ride in his golden chariot or step into a temple was to witness a living miracle, and yet behind this glory stood thousands of workers, slaves and artisans, whose sweat and skill turned the vision of Pharaoh into reality. Now imagine entering one of these palaces. The air is cool, shaded by high walls painted in red, blue, and gold. The floors are smooth stone, polished until they shine like mirrors. Columns carved like lotus flowers rise to the ceiling. Around you, servants move silently, carrying trays of food, jugs of wine, baskets of fruit. In the great halls, music plays, flutes and harps, dancers twist and sway. The smell of roasted meat mingles with incense. The pharaoh sits at the center, surrounded by nobles and generals, every eye fixed on him. For his presence is the anchor of the kingdom. The palace was not just a home. It was a stage, a symbol, a declaration of power, and Egypt was not alone. Across the Mediterranean, other kingdoms too built their own palaces. In Crete, the Minoans raised palaces at Knossos, sprawling labyrinths of rooms and corridors, their walls painted with dolphins leaping in blue seas, bold dancers flipping over horns in a blur of color and motion. These palaces were not fortresses. They were centers of trade, culture, and ritual. Their storerooms held jars of olive oil, honey, and wine. Their courtyards echoed with the laughter of children and the chanting of priests. The palace was the heart of society, a living organism of power and community. To step into such a place was to enter another world. You would hear the slap of sandals on stone, the calls of scribes reading from clay tablets, the clang of bronze tools in the workshops. You would smell the sweet scent of perfume, the acrid smoke of burnt offerings, the earthy aroma of bread baking in clay ovens. Every sense told you the same truth. You were in the center of power, but palaces and pharaohs were more than splendor. They were also guardians of order. In the Bronze Age, the world was fragile. Floods could destroy crops, invaders could burn cities, famine could starve whole villages. The pharaoh and the palace stood as shields against chaos. They organized irrigation, they stored grain for hard times, they commanded armies to defend the borders. To the people, the pharaoh was not just a man, he was the balance itself, the one who held back the floodwaters of disorder. This was the great promise of kingship, and also its great burden. And yet, with all this power, the pharaohs also craved immortality. They wanted their names to echo through eternity, so they built monuments unlike anything the world had ever seen. Think of the temples of Karnak, forests of stone columns reaching to the sky, every surface carved with hieroglyphs, every wall painted with stories of gods and kings, or the tombs cut deep into the valley of the kings, hidden chambers filled with gold amulets and spells to guide the pharaoh into the afterlife, and of course the pyramids, mountains of stone rising from the desert, monuments so vast that they still defy imagination. But behind the stone and splendor was a machine of human labor. Tens of thousands of workers dragged blocks across the sand. Scribes tracked every loaf of bread, every jug of beer used to feed them. Priests recited prayers as the work went on. For decades, generations of people poured their lives into building a legacy for their ruler. To them, this was not slavery alone. It was service to the divine. To help the pharaoh was to help the gods themselves. To raise a palace or temple was to keep the universe in balance. Yet, not all palaces survived. In Crete, around 1450 BCE, fire swept through the Minoan palaces. Knossos, once a jewel of the Aegean, fell into decline. Its walls blackened, its storerooms emptied. Scholars still debate why. Was it invasion, earthquake, or simply time itself? Whatever the cause, the splendor of palaces could vanish in a single night. The same was true across the Bronze Age world. Palaces rose and fell, pharaohs reigned and died, but the dream of kingship, of divine rule, endured. Now, let us walk once more through a palace corridor. The walls glow with torchlight. Shadows flicker across paintings of gods and battles. You hear the murmur of priests, the laughter of children, the shuffle of sandals. You feel the coolness of stone beneath your hand. You know, without a doubt, that you are standing in the center of the ancient universe. This was the age of pharaohs and palaces, when rulers reached for eternity, when stone and story were woven together, when power was not hidden but displayed for all to see. And yet, for all their wealth, for all their glory, these palaces and kings lived in a fragile world, a world where wealth flowed like rivers, but rivers could run dry, a world where trade carried treasure, but also carried war, because while pharaohs ruled from palaces and gods seemed to walk the earth, the true strength of the Bronze Age also flowed through writing, through stories pressed into clay, through words that could outlast even stone. The palaces glittered with jewels. The pharaohs carved their names in eternity. But the next step of the journey takes us into a quieter revolution, one that would give memory to humanity and voice to the ages. Listen, can you hear it? Not the sound of hooves or the clash of bronze, not the roar of battle or the chants of kings, but a softer sound, the scratch of a reed on wet clay, the tap of a hammer on cool stone. This is the sound of memory, the sound of voices trying to outlive their time, the sound of words being carved into eternity. Because before writing, the world was silence. Stories lived only in mouths and minds, fragile as smoke. Here, in the Bronze Age, humanity unlocked its greatest treasure, the power to trap thoughts in clay and stone, the power to speak across centuries, the power to be remembered. This is the story of the first voices that never died. Imagine standing in a dim workshop in Mesopotamia. The air smells of wet clay. Your feet sink slightly into the cool earth floor. Around you, shelves are stacked with tablets, small, square, each one covered in wedge-shaped marks. A scribe bends over his work, reed stylus in hand, pressing carefully into the soft clay. Each mark is sharp, deliberate, permanent. This was cuneiform, the world's first writing system born in Sumer. Each wedge pressed into clay carried meaning. Grain rations, temple offerings, trade deals, hymns to the gods. At first, writing was about numbers, lists, keeping track, but slowly it became more. It became a way to capture the soul of a civilization. Now step into Egypt. The air is dry, the walls are tall, and on them, painted in red, blue and green, are pictures that speak. A falcon soaring, an eye watching, a lotus blooming. These were hieroglyphs, the sacred carvings of Egypt. To look at them was to see art and word fused together. Each sign carried sound and symbol, meaning and magic. Priests and scribes filled tombs with these words, spells to guide the pharaoh through the underworld, promises to the gods, dreams of eternity. Hieroglyphs were not just writing, they were power, for to write a name was to make it eternal, and to erase a name was to destroy its soul. But writing was not confined to palaces and temples. In markets, merchants used symbols to count. In courts, scribes recorded trials. On clay tablets, kings sent letters to rulers far away. One of the most famous collections of these voices comes from Amarna in Egypt. Hundreds of clay letters, written in cuneiform, sent by kings and princes of the Bronze Age world. They speak of alliances, betrayals, gifts of gold and ivory, desperate pleas for soldiers and aid. Reading them today feels almost shocking, for these voices are so human. Kings complain about not receiving enough gifts. Allies beg for help against invaders. One letter begins with flattery, then quickly turns into anger, accusing another king of lying. It is as if time has collapsed, and we are eavesdropping on a conversation 4,000 years old. Now, close your eyes and imagine the act of carving. On stone, the steady rhythm of hammer on chisel. Sparks fly, dust fills the air. Slowly, a line of words appears. These inscriptions were built to last, carved deep into walls, steles, and monuments. The Code of Hammurabi is one of the greatest examples, a tall black stone covered with laws, each line spelling out justice, punishments, and order. Here, the king declared to all who could read, and even to those who could not, that law ruled the land. These voices carved in stone still speak. They tell us of theft and trade, of family and honor, of punishments both harsh and merciful. They show use not just kings, but the struggles of ordinary lives. Writing also gave birth to something else, stories. Take the Epic of Gilgamesh. Scratched into clay, it tells of a king who seeks immortality, who fights monsters, who loses his friend, who learns that life itself is precious. To read it is to walk through the mind of people who lived thousands of years ago. And what do we find? We find grief, hope, fear, love, all the same emotions we know today. Or think of hymns to Inanna, goddess of love and war, sung by priestesses. And preserved in cuneiform, their rhythm, their poetry still lingers. These are not dead words. They are living voices. But writing was not for everyone. It was a secret art, controlled by the scribes. To become a scribe was to enter an elite order. You trained for years, memorizing hundreds of signs, copying texts again and again. Your tools were simple: a reed, clay, and patience. But your power was immense. Scribes were the keepers of knowledge. They knew the contracts, the prayers, the laws. Without them, kingdoms could not function. Palaces needed scribes. Temples needed scribes. Armies needed scribes. They stood quietly at the side of power. But without them, power could not speak, and writing, like trade, spread from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Indus Valley to China. Everywhere it traveled. It took on new shapes. The Indus people carved mysterious symbols on seals, tiny pictures pressed into clay. To this day we cannot read them. Their voices are silent, waiting to be unlocked. In China, oracle bones carried the earliest characters. Questions were carved into shells and bones, then heated until cracks formed. Priests read the cracks as answers from the gods. These markings grew into a script that still lives today, a direct line from the Bronze Age to our modern world. Now, let us walk through a library of clay tablets. Imagine shelves stacked high with thousands of them, each one heavy in the hand, each one marked with signs. Together they contain myths, accounts, lists, songs. This was not just memory. It was civilization itself. The library of Ashurbanipal in later centuries held tens of thousands of tablets. But even in the Bronze Age, the seeds of this dream were there, the dream of storing, knowledge, of keeping it safe, of speaking to the future. But writing had another, darker side, for if words could preserve, they could also erase. To chisel away a name from stone was to kill twice, once in life and once in memory. Many rulers tried to destroy the legacy of those who came before, erasing their names, rewriting their stories, claiming their deeds. And yet, clay and stone are stubborn. Many names survive in fragments. Many erased voices still whisper. A broken tablet, a chipped inscription, even a single word can bring someone back from silence. Think for a moment of how fragile human life is. A body turns to dust, a voice fades, a face is forgotten, but through clay and stone, something of us remains. The Bronze Age was the first time humans truly fought against the silence of time. And they won. Their voices are still here. They speak in wedges and pictures, in prayers and laws, in myths and letters. They remind us that we are not so different from them. We too fear death, long for love, seek justice, build stories. Now picture yourself holding a clay tablet, the edges rough, the surface cool, the marks pressed into it 4,000 years ago. You run your fingers across them. And in that moment you are touching the hand of a scribe long dead. You are holding his thought, his world, his voice. This is the miracle of writing. It carries across time, across silence, across death. The Bronze Age gave us many wonders, bronze itself, chariots, palaces, trade, but perhaps its greatest gift was the written word, for with writing, humanity could remember. Humanity could dream bigger, humanity could speak forever. These were the voices on clay and stone, whispering to us still. Asterisk, but words could not always protect kingdoms. For across the Bronze Age world, storms gathered, invaders came, cities burned, trade faltered. The voices on clay and stone would soon describe not just life but collapse. Listen closely. Do you hear it? The rumble of thunder in the distance, the crash of waves against a rocky shore, the thud of countless feet marching closer. This is not the storm of nature, but of men, a storm of steel, fire, and hunger, a storm that swept across the Bronze Age world, leaving kingdoms in ruins and cities in ash. The empires of the age had grown powerful. Egypt, the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, the kingdoms of Canaan, but no empire lasts forever, and from the shadows of the Mediterranean, from the edges of the known world, new forces rose, unstoppable, unpredictable. They were called the Sea Peoples, the destroyers, the raiders, the storm. This is the story of how civilizations fell. Imagine the coast of the eastern Mediterranean. The air is heavy with salt. Gulls circle overhead. On the horizon, sails appear, not one or two, but dozens. Their hulls are long, low, carved with strange symbols. Warriors stand ready with spears and shields, eyes fixed on the shore. For the farmers in the fields, for the merchants in the ports, this sight was terror itself. These were not traders coming in peace. These were invaders, desperate, hungry, armed. And when they landed, they did not bargain. They burned, they looted, they destroyed. The Sea Peoples appeared like a nightmare in history. We do not know exactly where they came from. Some say from the islands of the Aegean, some from the coasts of Anatolia, others from the west beyond the horizon. They may have been refugees, fleeing famine or war, or perhaps outcasts. Pirates turned conquerors. What we know is this: when they came, they brought ruin. Now step into Egypt. The year is around 1200 B.C. The pharaoh Ramses III stands in his palace. His scribes bring urgent reports. Foreign armies marching along the coast. Strange ships moving across the sea. Egypt itself is under attack. We can almost see it. The battle raging along the Nile Delta. Ramses commanding his archers, thousands of arrows darkening the sky. Egyptian ships ramming into enemy vessels, spears clashing, shields breaking. The inscriptions carved into temple walls show it all. The pharaoh standing tall. The Sea Peoples bound in chains. Egypt survived, but barely. Ramses called it a victory. But it was a victory won in desperation. The Sea Peoples had shaken even the mightiest empire of the age. But not all kingdoms were so fortunate. In Anatolia, the great Hittite empire collapsed, their palaces abandoned, their cities burned. Letters carved in clay tell of famine, invasions, and enemies pressing from all sides. The once proud kings begged for grain, begged for soldiers, but help never came. In Greece, the Mycenaean world fell. The palaces at Mycene, Pylos and Tyrans were destroyed. The great halls of kings turned to rubble. The linear B tablets stopped suddenly as if a hand had been frozen. In time, civilization there collapsed into silence. Across Canaan, cities like Ugarit were wiped out. One letter found in its ruins still carries the desperate plea of its king. Ships of the enemy are at the gates, but the letter was never delivered. Ugarit was gone. Picture walking through these ruins today. The smell of smoke long gone, but the blackened stones remain. The streets once filled with merchants and laughter lie empty. The walls are broken, the temples shattered. For archaeologists, the layers of ash tell the story. The fire was sudden, the destruction complete. The storm came quickly, and nothing was the same after. What caused this storm, historians still debate. Some point to climate change, a great drought that forced entire peoples to migrate. Others suggest earthquakes, famine, or rebellions within the kingdoms themselves. Perhaps it was all of these together, a chain reaction that shook the world. But in the memory of the survivors, it was the sea peoples who carried the blame. They became the symbol of chaos, the faceless enemy, the destroyers who could not be reasoned with. Now imagine being an ordinary villager at the time. You wake at dawn to the sound of shouting. Smoke rises from the harbor. The earth trembles under running feet. The air fills with the clash of bronze and the cries of the dying. You grab your children. You flee into the hills. Behind you, your home is consumed in flames. For countless families, this was reality. The fall of the Bronze Age was not just the collapse of palaces, but of lives, of farms, of hopes. The world that had been stable for centuries was broken. And yet, even in collapse, some voices survived. Clay tablets buried in the ruins, inscriptions carved in stone, letters written in desperation. These fragments speak to us across time. They tell us of fear, of loss, but also of resilience, of kings who tried to fight, of people who struggled to endure. It is haunting to read these words today, knowing they were written at the edge of disaster, knowing that the people who wrote them may not have survived. Their voices are whispers carried by clay and stone, reminders of a storm that nearly ended civilization. The Bronze Age was a world connected by trade, by writing, by kings and gods, but storms of invasion tore those connections apart. The networks broke, the palaces fell, the old world ended. And yet, from the ashes, a new world would one day rise. The Iron Age, stronger, harder, forged in the lessons of collapse. But before that dawn there was a long night. Think of it like the crashing of waves, one after another, unrelenting, each wave breaking down walls, sweeping away cities, drowning kingdoms, until only fragments remained. The Bronze Age world was never the same, but those fragments, those survivors, carried seeds of what would come next. So the storms of invasion remind us of something. Civilizations, no matter how great, are fragile. A palace can fall in a night. A library can burn in an hour. A voice can vanish in silence. And yet, through memory, through story, through ruins, we still hear them. Asterisk, asterisk, but after the storms passed, after the invaders had come and gone, the question remained, what happens when the old world falls? When kings are gone, when palaces lie in ruins, when trade collapses, what rises from the ashes? Listen closely. Do you feel it? The silence after the storm, the emptiness after the fire, the world holding its breath. For centuries, kingdoms had risen. Rivers fed cities, trade tied lands together, and gods walked among men, but then, suddenly, it ended, not in one place, not in one year, but across the known world. A chain of disasters struck like falling dominoes, one after another, until the Bronze Age itself lay in ruins. This was not just the fall of a city or a kingdom. This was the collapse of an entire age. Imagine walking through the ruins of Ugarit. The air smells of ash. The streets are empty, walls cracked, houses burned. In the palace, a clay tablet lies on the ground. The words pressed into it still readable today. Ships of the enemy are at our gates, but no help came. The city fell. And with it, a piece of the world disappeared, now moved to Greece. Once there were palaces filled with feasting, music, and the glow of torchlight. At Mycenae, at Pylos, at Tiryns, kings ruled from thrones of gold, but now the halls are silent, the stones blackened, the doors broken, the linear bead tablets, once used to track trade and tribute, stopped suddenly, frozen in time, as if the scribes had fled mid-sentence. In Anatolia, the great Hittite empire, rival of Egypt, was gone. Hattusa, its capital. Abandoned, palaces in ruins, statues toppled. For centuries the Hittites had been a superpower. Now they were a whisper. The collapse was everywhere. Trade routes broke, cities were abandoned, populations shrank, technology slowed, literacy almost vanished. It was as if the light of civilization itself flickered and dimmed. Why did it happen? That question still haunts us. Some say it was famine. Great droughts swept across the land. The rains failed, crops withered. Granaries emptied, hungry people rose in rebellion. Desperate to survive, archaeologists have found signs of dry years in tree rings, in mud layers, in pollen records. The earth itself remembers. Others say it was war, the sea peoples and other. Invaders sweeping across coastlines, burning cities, cutting trade. The collapse of one kingdom weakened another, a chain reaction of ruin. Some speak of earthquakes, great ones that shook the eastern Mediterranean, leaving walls cracked, cities crumbled. Survivors fleeing, in some ruins, we find fallen stones, broken in patterns only earthquakes make, and perhaps it was all of these together, disaster upon disaster, storm upon storm, until the system could no longer hold. Think of the Bronze Age world as a web, each kingdom connected by trade. By diplomacy, by shared culture, the web was strong, but also fragile. Pull one thread, and the rest began to unravel. The fall of Ugarit weakened the Hittites. The fall of the Hittites shook Egypt. The fall of Mycenae left the Aegean adrift. And soon the entire web collapsed. Now picture the people living through it. Not kings or generals, but farmers, craftsmen, mothers, children. You wake to find the fields dry, the river low, the sky cloudless for months. You plant again, but nothing grows. Hunger creeps in. You hear rumors of raiders, of strangers crossing the sea. You pack what little you own and flee. You leave behind your home, your ancestors' graves, the temple where you once prayed. For millions of people, this was reality. Survival became the only goal. Culture, art, writing, trade, all these faded into the background. The great achievements of centuries crumbled. In the dust of necessity, the collapse was not just material. It was cultural. Writing nearly vanished. The scribes, once the memory keepers of the world, were gone. In Greece, literacy disappeared for centuries. This time is called the Dark Age, when songs and stories survived only in oral tradition, passed by word of mouth, fragile as smoke. The myths of Homer, the tales of heroes and wars may be echoes of this time, memories of a world once filled with palaces and kings. retold in poetry when the writing was lost. But collapse is not always an end. Sometimes it is a beginning. Out of the ruins of the Bronze Age, new cultures rose, stronger, leaner, adapted to a harsher world. In Greece, from the ashes of the palaces came the seeds of the classical age. In the Levant, small kingdoms like Israel and Phoenicia emerged. In Anatolia, new peoples, such as the Phrygians, appeared. The Bronze Age had fallen, but its memory lived on, carved in stone, preserved in myth, waiting to inspire the ages that followed. Still, imagine standing at the edge of it all. You are a survivor, walking through the rubble of a city once alive with voices. The smell of smoke lingers, the silence is heavy. You do not know the word collapse. You only know loss, you only know that the world of your parents is gone for those who lived it. This was not history, it was life, it was fear, hunger, and survival. It was watching the old world die and stumbling into a new one. The great collapse reminds us of something important. Civilizations are not eternal. They are fragile. They can rise in glory, but they can also fall, often not in fire and glory, but in silence and hunger and slow unraveling. And yet, collapse is not the end of humanity. It is change, painful and violent, but change nonetheless. Out of collapse, new ways of life are born, new cultures, new stories, new beginnings. So, as we stand among the ruins of the Bronze Age, as we read the broken tablets, the toppled statues, the empty palaces, we must ask ourselves, what do we learn? That no empire lasts forever, that no system is too strong to break, that resilience comes not from kings or palaces, but from people, from survivors, from memory. The great collapse was the end of an age, but not the end of humanity, asterisk, asterisk. And yet, even as the world crumbled, one question lingered. What survived? Which fragments of the Bronze Age carried into the future? Which voices refused to be silenced? Close your eyes for a moment. The cities have fallen, the palaces are burned, the scribes are silent. The Bronze Age world has collapsed, but not all is gone, and the shadows of ruin. People still breathe, still fight, still hope for survival. Itself becomes the greatest story. This is not the tale of kings or great battles. This is the tale of the forgotten, of the ones who endured when everything else fell. In their hunger, their courage, their whispers, the future was born. Imagine walking through the ruins of a palace. The air is heavy with smoke, even though the fires died years ago. Ash crunches. Under your feet, the great halls where feasts were once held now echo with only the wind. A goat wanders among broken stones, its hooves clicking against marble. But beyond the ruins, life stirs. In the hills, small huts stand, built from mud and reed. Children chase each other in the dust. Farmers scratch the dry earth, trying to coax grain from stubborn soil. Traders gather at crossroads, exchanging scraps of bronze, bits of pottery, jars of oil. Civilization has shrunk, but it has not vanished. It hides now in valleys, in villages, in memory. Think of Greece after the fall of the Mycenaean palaces. Once golden halls echoed with lyres and poetry. Now villages clung to rocky hillsides. People lived in simple houses, herding goats, farming small fields. Writing disappeared, but stories did not. Around fires, old men and women told tales of gods and heroes, of a brighter past. These stories became the seeds of Homer, carried for centuries by word of mouth. Even in collapse, memory survived. Not in stone, not in clay, but in voice, now. Picture Egypt, bruised but alive. The pharaohs no longer commanded vast empires, their borders shrank, their wealth drained, but the Nile still flowed. Year after year, it rose and fell, feeding the fields, keeping life alive. Egypt endured not in grandeur, but in persistence. The temples still stood, though smaller, the gods were still honored, though with fewer offerings in the shadows. Survival meant holding on to tradition, even when the world outside burned. Across Canaan, the collapse left cities in ashes, but out of those ashes small kingdoms rose. Israel, Judah, Phoenicia, each carved out life from the ruins. The Phoenicians turned to the sea, building ships, trading far and wide, carrying goods and ideas. They would one day spread their alphabet across the Mediterranean, an alphabet born from survival. The Israelites, meanwhile, turned their memory into scripture, preserving their struggles, their laws, their faith. Their survival was not just physical, it was spiritual, a survival of identity. But survival was never easy. Imagine the fear, the hunger, the exhaustion of these times. A mother wakes before dawn, her children thin with hunger. She searches the fields for anything edible, wild herbs, roots, a few grains left from last season. At night, she whispers prayers to the gods, or perhaps to one God alone, asking for strength, asking for tomorrow. This was survival, not in glory, but in quiet endurance. And yet, in these shadows, innovation was born. Iron began to replace bronze, not because it was stronger at first, but because it was more available. Villagers could forge tools from the black metal, plow their fields, arm themselves against raiders. Slowly iron spread, transforming survival into recovery. In the Levant, small towns became trading ports. From these ports, ships carried cedar, glass, purple dye. The world of trade slowly rebuilt itself, not as fast as before, but alive. Think of the resilience it took. For centuries, the Bronze Age had given people stability, trade networks, great kings. Now they had none of that, and yet they adapted. They built smaller, simpler lives. They worked with what they had. They found new ways. They carried memory through story, through faith, through stubborn persistence. Humanity has always been stronger than collapse. The shadows of survival are proof. In the highlands of Anatolia, new peoples settled where Hittite palaces once stood. They brought their own traditions, their own gods, their own stories. They did not rebuild the old empire. They built something different, something shaped by survival. In Greece, centuries later, city-states would rise, democracy would be born, philosophy would bloom. But its roots were in this dark age, in the shadows where people remembered, struggled, and survived. Now step into one of those small villages. The sun is setting, fires flicker, the smell of smoke and stew fills the air. Children sit close as an elder tells a story of heroes who fought monsters, who defied gods, who built cities of gold. The children's eyes are wide. They do not know that this story is a memory of a real age long gone. But in their hearts it keeps the past alive. This is survival, not just of the body, but of the spirit. The great collapse destroyed the world of palaces and kings, but it could not destroy humanity's will to endure. People adapted, reshaped, found new paths, and in doing so they carried the spark of civilization forward, waiting for the day it would blaze again. Survival is not glorious. It is not remembered in monuments. It is remembered in whispers, in scars, in shadows. But without it, There would be no tomorrow, so the shadows of survival teach us something timeless. Collapse does not end us. Hunger does not silence us. Fear does not erase us. As long as people endure, civilization endures, not in its old form, but in a new. 1. Asterisk. And as the survivors lived on, as they whispered their stories and forged new lives, something unexpected began to rise. Out of the ashes, new legacies were born, traditions, alphabets, and ideas that would shape the future world. Imagine a world long gone, palaces turned to dust, kings forgotten, armies buried beneath the earth, and yet their shadows still reach us. Even now, thousands of years later, you hold pieces of their lives in your hands. When you write a word, when you turn a key, when you hear a story, the Bronze Age is not gone. It lives within us. This is the final chapter of an age that rose, burned and collapsed, but never truly died. It left behind something far greater than its ruins. It left its legacy. Walk with me through the silence of a ruined palace. The air smells of dust and age. Stones are broken, walls cracked, yet carved deep into the floor is a symbol, a mark left by human hands 3,000 years ago. That mark survived fire, war, and collapse. And in that mark lies the truth of the Bronze Age, what it left behind. For this age was not just about bronze, weapons, or chariots. It was about the first experiments of civilization, the first time humans built great networks of trade, the first time we told stories in writing, the first time we carved laws into stone. All of that is its legacy. Think of writing. It was in the Bronze Age that clay tablets carried words for the first time. The Sumerians pressed symbols into wet clay, and suddenly thought had permanence. Contracts, prayers, stories, even shopping lists were recorded. This was not just communication. It was memory. Humanity's first attempt to defeat time itself. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the oldest surviving story, comes from this age. A king who searched for immortality. His words carried on clay. That story survived palaces, empires, and collapse, and it still speaks to us, reminding us that even in the ancient world, humans ask the same questions we ask today. Or think of law. Hammurabi of Babylon carved his code into stone. The laws were simple, sometimes harsh, but they were written for all to see. They told people, this is how justice works. This is what is fair. This is what is not. That idea that law is not the will of one man, but something recorded, remembered, and applied was a seed that grew through history, reaching even into our modern courts. The Bronze Age gave us cities, vast cities like Ur, Mycenae, Hattusa, and Thebes. They were the first experiments in human cooperation. Thousands of people living together, sharing water, food, trade, and defense. From these early cities came the blueprint of urban life we still follow. Roads, temples, markets, homes clustered together. These were the first sparks of what we now call civilization. Trade was another gift. Imagine ships leaving the harbors of Phoenicia, their sails catching. The wind carrying timber, wine, oil, and purple dye across the Mediterranean. Imagine caravans of donkeys moving through deserts, their packs filled with tin and lapis lazuli. These networks tied the ancient world together. For the first time, humans learned that survival and wealth came not just from conquest, but from exchange. That legacy is with us every time a ship docks in a port, every time a plane carries goods across the world. The Bronze Age taught us the power of connection. But the legacy was not only practical, it was also spiritual. This was the age when humans first built massive temples to gods, ziggurats that rose like mountains of brick, pyramids that pierced the sky. In these monuments, humanity said, "We are small, but we reach for the eternal." The gods of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Greece were born in this time, and their stories carried into every culture that followed. Even faith itself is part of this legacy. For in the ruins of Canaan, in the voices of wandering tribes, new ideas of God began to take shape, ideas that would one day shape entire religions. Now picture war not as chaos, but as a legacy too. Chariots thundered across plains, bronze. Blades clashed, shields locked. For the first time, war became organized, strategic, almost industrial. This dark inheritance shaped how states rose and fell. It taught humanity the cost of ambition, the fragility of empire, the weight of power. But in that cost also lay wisdom. For every collapse, every ruin left behind lessons carved into history. And then came the collapse itself, the great collapse that shattered the palaces and silenced the scribes. Yet even in that silence the legacy endured. Iron replaced bronze, alphabets replaced cuneiform, new peoples rose, carrying fragments of what was lost. They built on those fragments, turning shadows into light. The Greeks, centuries later, looked back at the heroes of the Bronze Age and sang of them. Achilles, Hector, Agamemnon. The Egyptians looked back and held on to their gods. Their Nile, their temples. The Hebrews looked back and turned survival into scripture. The Bronze Age lived on, reshaped, retold, reimagined. Think of the alphabet. The Phoenicians, born out of the collapse, carried letters across the sea. They simplified writing, turning complex symbols into simple sounds. This gift spread to the Greeks, then the Romans, and eventually to us. Every word you read, every word you write, carries the legacy of the Bronze Age alphabet. Think of iron, black and strong. The knowledge of working it spread during the shadows. After the collapse, but its beginnings were in this age. It gave people stronger tools, sharper weapons. It gave them survival, and survival gave birth to the future. The Bronze Age was not perfect. It was cruel. It was fragile. It was filled with war and hunger, but it was also the beginning of everything. It was humanity's first great experiment, and even in failure, it taught us how to begin again. Every city we build, every law we pass, every story we tell, carries echoes of that ancient time. When we write our names, when we light a fire in the dark, when we stand in awe of something greater than ourselves, we are still living in its shadow. Close your eyes and imagine the last day of the Bronze Age. The sun sets over a ruined palace. Smoke rises from villages. Refugees walk the roads. The age of kings and palaces is gone, but the mother carrying her child still walks. The farmer still plants seeds. The storyteller still whispers, and from them, from their survival, comes us. So what is the legacy of the Bronze Age? It is not only in the ruins we dig from the earth, not only in the treasures locked in museums, it is in the very fabric of who we are. The first cities, the first laws, the first writing, the first great stories, the first faiths, these belong to us because they belonged to them. They remind us that we are part of a chain unbroken by fire, famine, or collapse. The Bronze Age is gone, but its spirit endures, whispered in every word we speak, carved in every law we follow. shining in every city we build. Asterisk, the story of the Bronze Age does not end here, because endings are always beginnings. From its collapse rose new powers, new empires, and new visions of the world. The Iron Age dawns, carrying forward everything the Bronze Age left behind.